April 24, 1942, Gibraltar Harbour, HMS Seraph submarine dock. A small, balding Spaniard with unremarkable features stepped onto British soil for the first time. Juan Pujol Garcia carried a single suitcase and spoke no English. He had no military training, no intelligence experience, no connections to British espionage networks. What he did have was a network of 27 secret agents reporting from across Britain, detailed intelligence on military movements, convoy schedules, defence installations. There was one small problem. None of his agents existed. Every single one was a fiction created in a Lisbon hotel room using a blue guide to England and newspapers from the library. For the previous year, Pujol had been feeding the German Abwehr intelligence reports from agents in London, Glasgow, Bristol, Liverpool, places he had never visited. The Germans believed every word. They paid him $600 and provided secret ink, code books, and an Abwehr handler who considered him their most valuable asset in Britain. The British, monitoring German communications, were terrified. Someone had penetrated their defences. Someone was operating in the heart of Britain, sending detailed intelligence to Berlin. When MI5 finally identified the source, they discovered something extraordinary. The spy they feared wasn't in Britain at all. He was in Portugal, making everything up, and he wanted to work for them. 2 years later, from a modest house at 35 Crespini Road in Hendon, North London, Juan Pujol Garcia would orchestrate the greatest deception of World War II. He would convince Hitler that D-Day was a diversion. He would keep 2 armoured divisions and 19 infantry divisions waiting at Pas de Calais while the real invasion happened at Normandy. He would save London from accurate V-1 rocket targeting by arranging his own arrest. And when the war ended, he would disappear for 36 years, his wife and children believing he was dead. This is the story of Agent Garbo, the only man in history to receive both the Iron Cross from Hitler and the MBE from King George VI, the amateur who became the greatest double agent of the war, the spy who disappeared after saving London, February 14, 1912, Barcelona, Spain. Juan Pujol Garcia was born into a middle-class family with no particular distinction. His father owned a dye factory. His mother hoped he would become something respectable, a lawyer, perhaps, or a businessman. What she got was a son who failed at nearly everything he attempted. As a student, Pujol was unremarkable. As an apprentice in a hardware store, he lasted only months. He studied animal husbandry and managed a chicken farm that went nowhere. He tried running a cinema and failed. His marriage to Araceli Gonzalez in 1940 was already showing strain. But Pujol had one extraordinary gift: imagination, an uncontrollable, almost childlike imagination that allowed him to create elaborate fantasies and believe in them completely. Friends described him as a Walter Mitty figure, always daydreaming, always constructing alternative realities. That imagination, combined with a fierce idealism, would make him the most successful liar in the history of warfare. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War shattered any remaining illusions Pujol had about political ideologies. He was called up to serve in the Republican Army, which he opposed because they had arrested his mother and sister, charging them with being counter-revolutionaries. He hid in his girlfriend's home until captured and imprisoned. Released through connections, he obtained false papers showing him too old for service. Later, he was pressed into service by the nationalist side under Franco. He hated them equally. They imprisoned him for expressing sympathy for the monarchy. By the time the war ended in 1939, Pujol had experienced both fascism and communism firsthand. He loathed them both with a passion that would define the rest of his life. When World War II began, Pujol made a decision. He would fight totalitarianism the only way he knew how, through deception. He would become a spy, not for money, not for adventure, but for the good of humanity, as he later explained. There was one significant obstacle. He had absolutely no idea how to become a spy. January 1941, British Embassy, Madrid. Pujol approached the British 3 times, offering his services. 3 times he was turned away. He had no credentials, no connections, no experience. The British Embassy was flooded with volunteers, many of them German plants trying to infiltrate British intelligence. Pujol looked like just another enthusiastic amateur. "I want to fight the Nazis," he told the embassy official. "That's very patriotic," came the reply, "but we don't need your help." Rejected but undeterred, Pujol decided on a different approach. If the British wouldn't recruit him, he would recruit himself. But first, he needed credentials. He would establish himself as a German agent, then approach the British as a double agent with proven access. It was an insane plan. No training in espionage, no understanding of tradecraft, just pure audacity and an imagination that refused to accept limitations. Pujol created a false identity. He became a fanatically pro-Nazi Spanish official who travelled frequently and wanted to do his fascist duty for the Reich. He obtained a fake Spanish diplomatic passport by convincing a printer he worked for the embassy in Lisbon. He studied Nazi ideology and practiced speaking like a true believer. Then he walked into the Abwehr office in Madrid and offered to spy for Germany. The Abwehr officer, Friedrich Knapper-Reti, codenamed Federico, was skeptical at first, but Pujol's performance was convincing. Here was a Spanish official, seemingly well-connected, offering to travel to London and recruit agents. After several meetings, the Abwehr accepted him. They gave him codename Alaric. They provided a crash course in espionage, secret writing, invisible ink, basic cryptography. They gave him $600 for expenses and instructions to travel to Britain and begin recruiting. Pujol took the money, travelled to Lisbon, and never went near Britain. He was terrified of being arrested if he actually tried to enter the country. Instead, he checked into a modest hotel and began the greatest bluff in intelligence history. Using a blue guide to England, purchased at a Lisbon bookstore, British newspapers and magazines from the public library, and cinema newsreels, Pujol began fabricating reports from agents he claimed to have recruited in Britain. He established a daily routine. Each morning he would visit the Lisbon Public Library and read every British newspaper and magazine available: The Times, Manchester Guardian, Daily Telegraph. All provided details about British life that he could weave into his reports. He studied newsreels at local cinemas, memorizing the appearance of British cities, the uniforms of military personnel, the types of vehicles in use. He purchased travel guides, railway timetables, street maps of major cities. From his hotel room, he created detailed descriptions of military installations he had never seen. He reported on troop movements gleaned from newspaper accounts, adding fictional details to make them seem like insider information. He described British cities based on tourist guidebooks, inventing conversations he claimed his agents had overheard in pubs and train stations. But Pujol's lack of actual knowledge led to mistakes that should have exposed him immediately. He once reported that Glaswegians would do anything for a litre of wine in Scotland, where beer and whiskey were the drinks of choice, and wine was practically unknown. He described Dover Harbour using information from a pre-war travel guide, not realizing the geography had changed significantly due to wartime modifications. He reported military units that didn't exist and convoys that never sailed. He claimed his agents witnessed events on dates when those locations were actually under blackout conditions. He described soldiers carrying equipment that hadn't been issued yet. Any competent intelligence analyst should have caught these errors within weeks. But here's what made Pujol brilliant. He buried his mistakes in a flood of genuine information. He mixed real news, available to anyone reading newspapers, with complete fiction. He created a network of fictional sub-agents, each with distinct personalities, so any errors could be blamed on bad information from recruits. He invented a Portuguese courier, a KLM pilot who supposedly flew between London and Lisbon, explaining why all his letters were postmarked from Portugal. The Germans believed everything. They had an agent in London, they thought, with access to multiple sources. The reports were so detailed, so voluminous, that they seemed impossible to fake. When Pujol reported a convoy sailing from Liverpool, the Germans sent submarines to intercept it. The convoy didn't exist, but instead of suspecting Pujol, the Germans assumed the convoy had changed course at the last minute. By early 1942, the Abwehr considered Agent Alaric their most valuable source in Britain. They increased his payments. They requested more information. They trusted him completely. Meanwhile, British intelligence was having a very different reaction. Bletchley Park, December 1941. Cryptanalysts working on German naval communications intercepted messages referring to a highly placed German agent in Britain, codenamed Alaric. The messages referenced detailed intelligence reports that suggested someone with significant access was operating inside British defences. MI5 launched an immediate investigation. They cross-referenced Alaric's reports with actual military movements. Slowly, they realized something odd. Many of Alaric's reports were accurate, but useless. Information available in newspapers, but framed as secret intelligence. Other reports described units and operations that didn't exist. Someone was feeding the Germans a mixture of real and false information. But who? And where was he operating from? The breakthrough came when analysts noticed that all of Alaric's communications were postmarked from Lisbon, not London. MI5 put surveillance on possible German contacts in Portugal. They identified Pujol meeting with Abwehr officers. They intercepted his letters. And they realized what they were dealing with. This wasn't a German spy in Britain. This was a Spanish amateur in Portugal pretending to be in Britain, making everything up and somehow convincing the Germans it was real. MI5 faced a decision. They could expose Pujol to the Germans, destroying his network, or they could recruit him and turn his entire operation into a weapon against Germany. In February 1942, MI5 agent Desmond Bristow met Pujol in Lisbon. "The British would like to speak with you," Bristow said. "I've been trying to speak with the British for a year," Pujol replied. Within weeks, MI5 had arranged for Pujol, his wife Araceli, and their young son to be smuggled to Gibraltar and then to Britain. On April 24, 1942, Juan Pujol Garcia finally set foot in the country he had been reporting from for the previous year. He was given British codename Garbo, after Greta Garbo, because of his acting abilities. He was assigned to MI5 officer Thomas Harris, a Spanish-speaking intelligence officer who would become his partner in the greatest deception operation of the war. 35 Crespigny Road, Hendon, London, spring 1942. The house was unremarkable, a modest two-story suburban home that could belong to any middle-class family. Inside, Harris and Pujol set up operations. A wireless transmitter was installed. An operator, Charles Haynes, moved in to handle radio communications with Madrid. Pujol's fictional network of agents was about to become real, in the sense that it would be actively managed by British intelligence. Harris and Pujol made an extraordinary team. Harris was half Spanish, understood the language and culture perfectly, and had a mind for intricate deception. Pujol provided the imagination and the established credibility with the Germans. Together, they expanded Pujol's fictional network from a few imaginary agents to 27 fully developed characters, each with complete backstories, personalities, and regional expertise. There was Agent 1, a Portuguese travelling salesman who supposedly recruited the others. Pujol portrayed him as the foundation of the network, a man named Carvalho, who travelled extensively for business and could recruit sub-agents in different cities without arousing suspicion. Agent 2, a Swiss businessman in Bootle named Gerbers. According to Pujol's reports, Gerbers ran an import-export company and had access to dock workers who could observe convoy movements. The Germans never questioned why a neutral Swiss businessman would risk his business to spy for Germany. Agent 3, a Venezuelan student in Glasgow who would do anything for a litre of wine. Pujol named him Pedro, giving him a backstory as a wealthy South American studying at the University of Glasgow. Pedro supposedly had communist sympathies, making him an easy recruit for anti-British activities. This was the agent responsible for the infamous wine gaffe that should have exposed the entire operation. Agent 4, a Gibraltarian waiter named Fred working in the service canteens. Fred supposedly had access to military personnel who drank too much and talked too freely about operations. Harris and Pujol developed Fred into one of the most productive agents, feeding the Germans a steady stream of canteen gossip mixed with carefully crafted disinformation. Agent 5, brother of Agent 3, supposedly stationed with the US Power Forces. This agent didn't exist until the Americans entered the war, at which point Pujol conveniently recruited him to cover US military intelligence. Agent 6, Dick, a South African in London. Dick was portrayed as a low-level clerk in the Ministry of Information with access to censored materials that revealed more than they concealed. Agent 7, a Welsh fascist named Donny leading the Brothers of the Aryan World Order in Swansea. This was perhaps Pujol's most audacious invention, an entire fascist organisation in Wales that didn't exist. Donny supposedly commanded a network of Welsh nationalists who hated the English more than they hated the Germans. The Germans loved this agent because he confirmed their belief that Britain was fractured by internal dissent. Each agent had quirks, opinions, communication styles. When one agent made errors, Pujol would apologize to the Germans for the recruit's incompetence. When information needed to be delayed, an agent would report being ill or traveling. The Germans not only believed in these agents, they funded them. Over the course of the war, Germany paid Pujol $340,000, equivalent to roughly $6 million today, to support his network. Every penny went into British coffers. From 1942 to 1944, Harris and Pujol sent more than 500 letters and 2,000 radio messages to the Abwehr. The information was carefully calibrated, real intelligence mixed with fiction, truths delivered too late to be useful, disinformation designed to mislead German planning. Operation Torch, November 1942, was Pujol's first major test. Allied forces were preparing to invade North Africa. To maintain Pujol's credibility, he was allowed to warn the Germans, but the warning was timed to arrive too late for them to respond. Pujol sent accurate details about the convoy routes, timings, and landing sites. The message reached Madrid hours before the landings began, too late for Germany to reinforce North Africa. The Germans sent a reply, "We are sorry they arrived too late, but your last reports were magnificent." Pujol's credibility soared. By January 1944, Germany believed they had the most comprehensive intelligence network in Britain. They had stopped trying to recruit additional agents. Why bother when Alaric's network covered every major city and military installation? Then came the message, every intelligence service dreads. We believe the Allies are preparing a major invasion of Europe. Keep us informed. Operation Overlord was coming. D-Day, the largest amphibious assault in history, and Pujol would play the central role in convincing Hitler it was happening somewhere else. January to June 1944. The Hendon House became a factory of deception. Harris and Pujol, working with the 20 Committee, MI5's double-agent coordination body, crafted Operation Fortitude. The plan was audacious, convinced Germany that the D-Day landings at Normandy were a diversion and the real invasion would come at Pas de Calais, 150 miles northeast. To sell this deception, the Allies created a fictional army. FUSAG, 1st United States Army Group, 11 divisions that didn't exist. Commanded by General George S. Patton, whose reputation made the fiction credible. The FUSAG deception was perhaps the most elaborate military fraud ever attempted. The Allies established fake headquarters in southeastern England, across from Pas de Calais. They created entire divisions out of nothing. The 2nd British Airborne Division, the 4th British Army, the 1st Canadian Army Group. Radio operators transmitted thousands of fake messages using authentic military codes and procedures. The volume of radio traffic suggested a massive force preparing for invasion. Physical deceptions reinforced the electronic ones. The Allies built fake installations that German reconnaissance aircraft could photograph. Inflatable Sherman tanks were positioned in fields, looking perfectly authentic from the air. Dummy landing craft, LCTs made from canvas and wood, filled harbours in southeastern ports. False oil storage facilities, constructed from sewage pipes painted to look like fuel tanks, suggested the logistical preparations for a massive invasion force. Fake airfields were carved into the countryside, complete with dummy aircraft that could be seen from German reconnaissance flights. Allied engineers even created fake military camps with heating elements that created the thermal signature of thousands of soldiers living in tents. German infrared reconnaissance, a new technology in 1944, detected the heat patterns and confirmed that large forces were encamped in southeastern England. Montgomery created an entirely fictional army group in Kent, directly across from Calais, while the real invasion force gathered in southwestern England and Wales, far from German observation, and Garbo's network of agents confirmed everything the Germans saw. Agent 4 in the canteens reported hearing American soldiers talking about Patton's command, complaining about his strict discipline and demanding training schedule. Agent 7 in Wales described seeing military build-ups aimed at Calais, reporting on the insignia of divisions moving through his area. Agent 5 with the US forces provided details on FUSAG unit insignia, vehicle markings, and the organizational structure of Patton's command. Agent 3 in Glasgow reported on Canadian forces preparing for the invasion, describing their equipment and noting their distinctive shoulder patches. Each report contained enough verifiable truth to seem credible. When German agents, who were actually British double agents, confirmed parts of Garbo's reports, the Germans became even more convinced. The entire British double agent system, more than 120 agents controlled by MI5, coordinated their reports to support the FUSAG deception. Between January and June 1944, Pujol sent more than 500 messages to Madrid. Some days, more than 20 messages, all of them reinforcing the fiction that Calais was the target. But the masterpiece came on June 6, 1944, D-Day itself. The 20 Committee faced a delicate balance. If Pujol failed to warn about Normandy, the Germans would realize his network had missed the largest operation of the war. His credibility would be destroyed. But if he warned too early, the Germans might reinforce Normandy and the invasion could fail. Harris devised a brilliant solution. Pujol would warn the Germans, but at exactly the wrong time. At 3 a.m. on June 6th, Pujol's operator began calling Madrid on the radio. The message was urgent. A major Allied operation was beginning. Garbo reported that Agent 4 had intercepted conversations in the canteens, suggesting an imminent invasion. Agent 7's Welsh nationalists had observed massive troop movements toward the coast. The timing was perfect, early enough to seem like advance warning, late enough to be useless if anyone was actually listening. But no one in Madrid was listening. The German operators had gone off duty. Standard procedure called for 24-hour monitoring of important agents, but on this night, of all nights, the Madrid station was unmanned. For 5 hours, Pujol's operator called Madrid repeatedly. The urgency codes were transmitted correctly. The authentication signals confirmed this was a critical message from Garbo himself, not a routine report from a sub-agent. But the radios in Madrid sat silent. At 8 a.m., German operators finally came on duty and responded. By then, Allied troops were already on the beaches at Normandy. Thousands of soldiers were fighting and dying, while the Germans scrambled to understand what was happening. Pujol, in character as the outraged Garbo, sent a message that Harris later described as a masterpiece of controlled fury. "I am very disgusted, as in this struggle for life or death I cannot accept excuses or negligence. Were it not for my ideals and my faith in the cause, I would abandon this work immediately. I cannot accept that my extensive efforts and those of my agents should be wasted by the incompetence of the Madrid station. I warned you hours before the invasion began, and no one was there to receive the message. How many German soldiers have died because you were sleeping?" The message was calculated to do two things: maintain Garbo's credibility by showing he had tried to warn them, and make the Germans feel guilty enough to believe anything he said next. It worked perfectly. The Germans sent profuse apologies. "Please accept our deepest regrets for this inexcusable failure. Your warning would have been invaluable to the defence. We have reprimanded those responsible for the unmanned station. Your dedication to the cause is unquestioned. Please continue your excellent work." Garbo had successfully converted a missed opportunity into proof of his loyalty. Then Pujol delivered the killer blow. He sent a detailed analysis of what he was observing, a report that has been called the most important intelligence message of World War II. The Normandy landings, he reported, were significant, but not the main assault. His analysis was brilliant in its construction. "From the reports of my agents, I can confirm the following. The forces landing at Normandy represent approximately 20 divisions. However, Agent 5 reports that Fusag, under General Patton, comprises at least 50 divisions and remains in position near Dover. Agent 7 confirms that no significant troop movements have been observed away from the southeastern staging areas. Agent 4 reports hearing American officers in the canteens discussing a second, larger operation, scheduled for approximately 2 weeks after the initial landings. The message continued with specific details that made it seem irrefutable. The troops landing at Normandy do not include any of the 1st U.S. Army Group divisions that have been observed in southeastern England. The 3rd Canadian Division has participated in the Normandy landings, but the bulk of Canadian forces remain in position near Dover. British forces committed to Normandy represent secondary units, while elite forces remain uncommitted. Then came the conclusion that Hitler and his generals wanted to hear. I believe, therefore, that the Normandy operation is a diversionary attack designed to draw German reserves away from the Pas-de-Calais area, where the main invasion is still planned. I estimate the principal Allied assault will occur within 2 to 3 weeks at Pas-de-Calais, utilising the forces currently positioned in southeastern England under General Patton. The message was sent on June 9th, 3 days after D-Day. Hitler and his commanders had been debating whether to send reinforcements from Pas-de-Calais to Normandy. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in France, desperately wanted those reinforcements. The 15th Panzer Division and the 116th Panzer Division, positioned at Pas-de-Calais, could have turned the tide at Normandy in those critical first days. But Garbo's message convinced Hitler to wait. The Führer, reading the intelligence summary that included Garbo's analysis, made his decision. The reinforcements will remain at Calais. Rommel must hold with the forces he has. We will not weaken our defence of Calais based on what may be a feint. It was arguably the most important strategic decision Hitler made in the entire Normandy campaign, and it was based on intelligence from a Spanish chicken farmer making everything up in a house in North London. 2 panzer divisions and 19 infantry divisions remained at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. For 7 critical weeks after D-Day, those forces sat idle while Allied troops established their beachhead at Normandy. A post-war examination of German records showed that 62 of Pujol's reports during Operation Fortitude were included in Wehrmacht intelligence summaries. The Germans believed every word. On July 29, 1944, Pujol received a message from Berlin. The Führer has awarded you the Iron Cross Second Class for your extraordinary services to the German Reich. The award normally required Hitler's personal authorization and was typically reserved for front-line combat troops. Pujol sent his thanks. I am unworthy of such an honor, but I am grateful for the Führer's recognition. 5 months later, on November 25, 1944, King George VI awarded Pujol the MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire. He became the only person in history to receive military honours from both sides in World War II. But Pujol's greatest act of deception was still to come, and it had nothing to do with fooling the Germans. June 1944. London. The V-1 rockets began falling. Hitler's revenge weapons, Vergeltungswaffe 1 or Vengeance Weapon 1, were the world's first cruise missiles, pilotless aircraft packed with explosives. Launched from sites in France and Belgium, they flew at 400 miles per hour toward London, their distinctive pulse jet engines earning them the nickname buzz bombs or doodle bugs. When the engine cut out, the V-1 would fall and explode with devastating force. Between June 13th and the end of August 1944, more than 9,000 V-1s were launched at London. Approximately 2,400 reached the city. They killed 6,184 people and injured 17,981 more. Entire neighborhoods were flattened. The psychological impact was tremendous. Unlike conventional bombing raids, the V-1s came at all hours without warning, making normal life nearly impossible. The Germans were using agent reports to calibrate their targeting. The V-1 was an imprecise weapon. It could be aimed at a general area but not a specific target. By analyzing where the rockets landed and adjusting launch angles and fuel loads, the Germans could improve their accuracy. They needed ground observers to report exact impact locations. In late June, German intelligence asked Garbo to report on where the V-1s were landing. They wanted grid references, descriptions of damage, casualty estimates. This information would allow them to fine-tune their aim, concentrating hits on central London, government buildings, and population centres. Pujol faced an impossible situation. If he reported accurate impact points, the Germans would improve their targeting, and more Londoners would die. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of additional casualties would result from his intelligence. His reports would guide German rockets directly into the heart of London. But if he reported false information and the Germans discovered the deception, his entire network would be exposed. 3 years of carefully constructed credibility would evaporate. The D-Day deception might be compromised if the Germans realized Garbo had been lying. Everything he had built would collapse. Harris convened an emergency meeting with the 20 Committee. How could they maintain Garbo's credibility while protecting London? The solution they devised was elegant and ruthless. Harris devised another brilliant solution. On June 27, 1944, Garbo was arrested by British authorities. The operation was staged with theatrical precision. MI5 agents came to 35 Crespigny Road in the middle of the night, making enough noise to be observed by neighbours. Pujol was led away in handcuffs, looking appropriately terrified. His network sent urgent messages to Madrid. Agent 4 reported hearing rumours in the canteens that a Spanish spy had been arrested. Agent 7's contacts in Wales confirmed that a foreign national was being held on suspicion of espionage. Agent 6 claimed to have seen newspaper reports of the arrest, though no such reports actually appeared in the press. The Germans were alarmed. Garbo was their most valuable asset in Britain. If he was blown, their entire intelligence picture would collapse. Then came the carefully crafted resolution. After 3 days of detention, the British government sent a formal letter of apology. The letter, forged by MI5 on authentic Home Office stationery, explained that Senor Pujol Garcia had been arrested in error. An overzealous security officer had misinterpreted his behaviour and reported him as suspicious. Upon investigation, it was determined that Senor Garcia was a loyal Spanish businessman with no connections to espionage. The Home Secretary personally apologized for the inconvenience and any distress caused. Garbo was released and returned home, but now he had a perfect excuse to avoid London entirely. "I cannot risk returning to the city," he reported to the Germans. "The British authorities have apologized, but I remain on their radar. Any suspicious activity on my part will result in immediate rearrest. I must rely entirely on my agents for all intelligence from London. I will coordinate from a safe distance and avoid any actions that might draw attention." The Germans understood completely. Of course, Garbo couldn't operate in London after being arrested, even if the arrest was a mistake. His agents would have to do the work. Those fictional agents then began reporting V1 impacts, but the reports were systematically biased. When a V1 landed in central London, the agents reported it as landing several miles northwest of the actual impact. When a rocket fell short, landing in the southern suburbs, the agents reported it as hitting central London. The pattern was subtle. No single report was obviously false. But cumulatively, the reports created the impression that the Germans were overshooting their targets. The V1s were flying too far, the agents reported. Most were landing in the northern and western parts of London, beyond the government centres and heavy population areas. German launch crews, trusting Garbo's network, adjusted their aim. They reduced fuel loads slightly, allowing the rockets to fall short. They adjusted launch angles to compensate for the perceived overshoot. The V1s began falling increasingly short of central London. Instead of hitting Whitehall, Westminster, and the densely populated East End, the rockets were landing in the southern suburbs and open countryside beyond. British analysts, tracking the impact patterns, noticed the shift immediately. After Garbo began reporting false V1 locations, the average impact point moved approximately 6 miles south of central London. The death toll dropped dramatically. Post-war analysis estimated that Garbo's false V1 reports saved approximately 3,000 lives. 3,000 people who would have died in rocket attacks survived because a Spanish spy lying about impact locations caused the Germans to shorten their aim. September 1944. The war was turning decisively against Germany. Paris had been liberated. Soviet forces were advancing from the east. The Third Reich was collapsing. MI5 decided it was time to protect their greatest asset. If Germany fell and records survived, Nazi hunters might discover Garbo's identity. The man who had deceived Hitler might become a target for reprisals. They developed a plan. Garbo would go underground. His network would continue operating through his agents, but he would disappear from German communications. By early 1945, Garbo had vanished from Abwehr communications. The war ended in May. Pujol's wartime service was over, but what came next was perhaps more extraordinary than everything that had come before. 1948, London. Pujol's marriage to Araceli had not survived the war. The strain of living a lie, of constant fear of exposure, of pretending to be someone else, it had destroyed their relationship. She was homesick for Spain. She resented Britain, resented the intelligence services, resented the life they had been forced to live. At one point during the war, Araceli had threatened to blow Garbo's cover to the Germans. Harris had staged an elaborate deception, arranging for Pujol to be arrested to show her the consequences of her threat. She had begged for his release, promised to stay silent, but the damage was done. After the war, Pujol told Harris he wanted to leave Britain. He wanted a fresh start, far from Europe, far from memories of the war. Harris helped him arrange new identity documents. Pujol would go to Venezuela. Araceli and their 3 children would return to Spain. But MI5 had one more request. For Pujol's own safety, they wanted the world to believe he was dead. If Nazi sympathizers or surviving Abwehr officers learned he was alive, he might become a target. In 1949, British officials spread the story that Juan Pujol Garcia had died of malaria while in Angola. The story was told to Araceli and the children. The British ambassador to Spain made it official. Juan Pujol Garcia was dead, officially, permanently. Lagunillas, Venezuela, 1950s. A bearded man wearing thick glasses opened a small bookstore and gift shop in this oil boom town near Lake Maracaibo. He called it La Casa del Regalo, the gift house. The shop sold books in Spanish and English, postcards, souvenirs for the American oil workers who flooded the town. He was quiet, polite, kept regular hours. Neighbors knew him as a cultured man, well-read, who spoke several languages. He also taught English, German, and French at the local Shell oil training facility. The oil company needed translators and language instructors for their multinational workforce. Pujol was perfect for the job, multilingual, patient, with no apparent past that needed explaining. His students remembered him as a good teacher, if somewhat reserved. He never talked about himself, never mentioned Spain except to explain grammar points, never discussed the war except in the most general terms. He remarried. Carmen Cilia, a Venezuelan woman 20 years younger, who worked as a secretary in Caracas. They met at a party for oil company employees in 1959. She found him mysterious, intellectual, different from the rough oil workers who dominated Lagunillas. He found in her a chance to build a normal life, to be someone other than Garbo. They married in 1960. Carmen knew her husband had come from Spain, that he had left during difficult times. She knew his first wife and children were dead, killed in the war, he told her. She never questioned the story. Why would she? Spain had been devastated by civil war, and then by involvement in World War II. Millions had died. That her husband had lost his family was tragic, but not unusual. They had 2 sons, Carlos Miguel, born in 1961, and Joan Carlos, born in 1963. In 1965, they had a daughter, Maria Eugenia, who would bring them joy until her tragic death in 1975 at age 20. She died in a car accident on the dangerous mountain roads between Caracas and the coast. The loss devastated Pujol. His Venezuelan family knew him as Juan Garcia, a bookstore owner and language teacher, a good father who helped with homework, taught his children to speak multiple languages. A quiet man who read extensively, who loved literature and history. A man who seemed to have no past, but that wasn't unusual for European immigrants to Venezuela. Many Spaniards, Italians, Portuguese and Germans had come to Venezuela after the war, fleeing devastated economies and political upheavals. Most of them preferred not to discuss the past. Pujol fit perfectly into this community of people reinventing themselves. But sometimes, late at night, Carmen would find him sitting alone, staring out the window. "What are you thinking about?" she would ask. "Nothing," he would say. "Just remembering." Remembering what? Things I'd rather forget. She learned not to press him. Whatever he had experienced in Spain, in the war, had marked him deeply. Some wounds don't heal, she thought. Some memories should be left alone. In Spain, Araceli raised their 3 children alone. She told them their father had died in Africa, of malaria, while working for a British company. She showed them the official letter from the British Embassy confirming his death. She wore black for years, the traditional Spanish mourning. The children, Juan, Jorge, and a daughter whose name was never made public, grew up without a father. They carried his name, but no memory of him. Juan, the eldest, had been only 5 when his father died. He had vague memories of a man who told stories, who spoke several languages, who seemed always to be writing letters. But the memories faded. Jorge, younger still, remembered nothing. Their sister had no memory at all. Araceli never remarried. She worked as a seamstress, raised the children in a small apartment in Barcelona. She told them their father had been a good man, a patriot who had served his country. She never told them the truth because she didn't know the truth herself. For 36 years, 2 families lived on separate continents, neither knowing the other existed. Spanish children grew up believing their father was dead. Venezuelan children grew up believing their father's first family was dead. And Juan Pujol Garcia, the man in the middle, lived with the knowledge that he had abandoned one family to protect them all. For 36 years, Juan Pujol Garcia lived a lie more complete than any he had constructed during the war. He was a ghost, a man who had saved thousands of lives, who had received honors from kings and dictators, who had changed the course of history, and no one in Venezuela had any idea who he was. 1971. London. A young British politician named Rupert Allison, writing under the pen name Nigel West, became interested in wartime deception operations. He began researching double agents, particularly the mysterious Agent Garbo. Every intelligence officer he interviewed spoke of Garbo in reverent terms. "The greatest double agent of the war," they said. "Changed the course of D-Day," they claimed. But no one knew Garbo's real name. No one knew what had happened to him. Files remained classified. West persisted for years. He interviewed dozens of former MI5 officers, tracking down anyone who had worked on the 20 committee. Most were elderly, some had died, others refused to talk. But gradually, pieces emerged. All of them spoke of Garbo with reverence, but claimed not to know his real name. The breakthrough came from Anthony Blunt, the distinguished art historian and former MI5 officer. By 1983, Blunt had been exposed as a Soviet spy, a member of the Cambridge Five. "Garbo," he said slowly. "Yes, I met him during the war. Tommy Harris's agent. Remarkable fellow. Spanish. His name was either Juan or José Garcia." West hired a research assistant. In March 1984, she began calling every J. Garcia in the Barcelona phone book. There were hundreds. Most calls led nowhere. But one reached Pujol's nephew, the son of his brother Joaquin. "Juan Pujol Garcia?" the nephew said carefully. "Yes, he was my uncle. He died during the war. In Africa. Are you certain he died? The assistant asked. Long pause. No, the nephew admitted. My father always wondered. Uncle Juan was clever, very clever. The nephew provided an address in Venezuela. My cousin Carlos Miguel lives in Caracas. His father's name was also Juan Garcia. West flew to Caracas in May 1984. He found Carlos Miguel's address in La Trinidad. A man in his early 20s answered, Carlos Miguel Pujol Garcia? Yes. I'm looking for your father, Juan Pujol Garcia. I believe he may have been a British agent during World War II. Carlos Miguel stared. My father is a bookstore owner. He's never talked about the war. He returned with an elderly man, 72 years old, bearded, wearing thick glasses. West spoke in English. You're Agent Garbo. You created 27 fictional spies. You convinced Hitler that D-Day was happening at Calais. You saved thousands of lives. And you've been hiding for 36 years. The old man was silent for a very long time. Then he replied in perfect English. How did you find me? But West convinced him otherwise. The world should know his story, West argued. His children should know who their father was. History should record what he accomplished. Pujol agreed, but on one condition. He would tell his story in his own words. 1985. The publication of Operation Garbo changed everything. The book, co-authored by Pujol and West, revealed the full scope of the deception. The 27 fictional agents, the Iron Cross and the MBE, the V1 deception that saved London, the fake death and 36 years in hiding. The revelation shocked the intelligence community and amazed the public. Here was a man who had literally changed history, and no one had known. At West's urging, Pujol agreed to return to Britain, June 6, 1984, London, Buckingham Palace. On the 40th anniversary of D-Day, Juan Pujol Garcia stood before Prince Philip in an unusually long private audience. The prince knew the full story. He understood what Pujol had accomplished. You saved thousands of lives, Philip said. Britain owes you a debt that can never be repaid. Later that day, Pujol visited the Special Forces Club. A group of elderly men waited for him. Former MI5 officers, 20 committee members, men who had worked the deception with him 4 decades earlier. T.A. Robertson, Roger Fleetwood Hesketh, Cyril Mills, Desmond Bristow, all of them old now, all of them remembering. They embraced Pujol like a long-lost brother. Garbo, they said, the greatest of us all. Pujol also made a more painful journey. He returned to Spain to meet his first wife and the 3 children who had grown up, believing he was dead. The reunion was difficult. His daughter was angry, feeling betrayed. His sons were confused, trying to reconcile the father they had mourned with the man standing before them. Araceli, now elderly, could barely speak. I'm sorry, Pujol said. I had no choice. They would have killed me. Whether they forgave him is not recorded. Pujol made one final pilgrimage on June 6, 1984. He travelled to Normandy, to the beaches where Allied soldiers had landed 40 years earlier. He walked along the sand where thousands had died. He visited the American cemetery at Colleville-sur-Mer, row after row of white crosses stretching to the horizon. This is why I did it, he told West, so that fewer crosses would be needed, so that the invasion would succeed, so that totalitarianism would be defeated. He paused at one grave, a young American soldier, 19 years old, killed on D-Day. Because of what we did, the Germans kept their forces at Calais, Pujol said quietly. They didn't reinforce Normandy. How many lived because of that? I'll never know. But I hope it was enough. October 10th, 1988. Caracas, Venezuela. Juan Pujol Garcia died of a stroke at age 76. He was buried in Coroni, a small coastal town in Venezuela. His grave marker reads simply Juan Pujol Garcia, 1912-1988. No mention of Agent Garbo. No mention of the Iron Cross or the MBE. No mention of saving London or changing D-Day. His Venezuelan family knew him as a quiet man who had lived an unremarkable life. His British colleagues remembered him as the greatest deceiver in the history of warfare. His Spanish family struggled to reconcile the father who had abandoned them with the hero who had saved thousands. All of them were right. Today, a blue plaque marks 35 Crespigny Road in Hendon, identifying it as the home of Agent Garbo. The house looks exactly as it did in 1944, modest, unremarkable, suburban. Nothing about it suggests that from this address came the deception that helped win World War II. In Spain, historians debate Pujol's legacy. Some call him a hero who fought fascism with the only weapon he had, imagination. Others point out that he abandoned his wife and children, letting them believe he was dead for nearly 4 decades. In Britain, Pujol is remembered as one of the most valuable intelligence assets of the war. MI5's official history describes him as the greatest double agent of the Second World War. The 20 committee's records show that no other agent had the impact Garbo did. In Germany, few remember the name Juan Pujol Garcia. Those who know the story regard it with a mixture of embarrassment and grudging respect. The Abwehr was deceived so completely that they never suspected, even after the war ended. The truth is that Juan Pujol Garcia was all of these things: a hero and a deserter, a genius and an amateur, a man who saved thousands, and a father who abandoned his children. What cannot be disputed is the impact of his work, the deception he created, working with Thomas Harris from a house in North London, helped ensure that D-Day succeeded. The intelligence he fed the Germans kept critical forces away from Normandy at the crucial moment. The V1 deception he orchestrated saved countless Londoners from Hitler's revenge weapons. He did all of this with no formal training, no military background, no intelligence experience. Just imagination, audacity, and an unshakable belief that totalitarianism had to be defeated. And when it was over, he walked away. He became a ghost. He lived a quiet life in a small Venezuelan town, running a bookstore, teaching languages, raising a second family. For 36 years, the man who had deceived Hitler was himself a deception. Juan Pujol Garcia, the greatest spy of World War II, had disappeared. Only when historian Nigel West tracked him down in 1984 did the world learn that Agent Garbo had never really died. He had simply done what he did best, created a new identity so convincing that everyone believed it. The spy who saved London, the amateur who became a legend, the man who faked his own death and lived in the shadows for 4 decades. Agent Garbo, the greatest double agent in history. The man who proved that in the world of espionage, imagination is the most powerful weapon of all.